If you want to take your chords from sounding like this sounding like this, this is the video for you. This video is pretty much going to be my bro science way to explain chord progressions without any advanced music theory terms that just end up confusing you. I'm going to try to give you a bunch of easy to implement practical tips and things you can do to start making your melodies sound better today. I'm going to be going over complete basics if you're starting out from zero and you have no idea how to make chord progressions or melodies. And if you're a little bit more advanced, I got more stuff for you throughout the rest of the video. I'm going to give you 10 go-to chord progressions that never miss, and I'm going to show you exactly how to make them. And then if you stick around, I'm going to show you how to build on those basics and make some super advanced sounding chord progressions like this. Now, I'm by no means a music theory expert, so I'm going to explain this in producer terms. I definitely think you'll learn a thing or two from this video. Anyways, let's start out with the basics, assuming you're someone who's starting out from zero. And like I just said, if you're a little bit more advanced, bear with me. The end of this video is going to have a bunch of information for you, but I wanted to go over the basics for people who are super new. Before we actually get into making chords and playing stuff like this, you need to have an understanding of the actual notes on the keyboard. On the keyboard, there are 12 different notes. And first, I want to start off with these white keys right here. These are the natural notes. And it goes like this: C, D, E, F, G, A, B, back to C. So these are the main notes on the piano, and then there's these black keys, which some people get a little bit confused by. So these are flats and sharps. And a sharp has a hashtag on it, that's the symbol, and then a flat has this little B note. And it can get confusing knowing when to call something a sharp or a flat. Honestly, it really doesn't matter. I'm sure some music theory guy is gonna get pissed about this, but pretty much the way that I think about it is if you want something to be a sharp, it's just going up a note to the black key. And then if you want something to be a flat, it's going down a note to the black key. So this same note can be C, and this can be a C sharp, this black note. Or if you're going down from D, you call that a D flat. So it's a C sharp or a D flat. So essentially all these black notes right here are flats and sharps. Now, if you're a super beginner, I recommend not really paying attention to much else in the video and just learning by memory every single one of these notes, so that if I point to this note right here, you know that's an A flat or a G sharp. Take a week, get some index cards, I don't know, whatever works for you, and just memorize every single one of these notes, because it's gonna make everything so much easier for making melodies. All right, so now that you know the notes that are on the keyboard, you need to understand what a scale is. So if you've ever heard the word scale or key, essentially what it is a group of notes on the keyboard that sound good together. And there's two main keys that you'd be using: a major key or a minor key. And a minor key has a more dark, kind of sad tone, and a major key has a more happy, uplifting kind of tone. And my personal recommendation is to choose one scale and stick with that scale and memorize it and learn it, because everything becomes so much easier once you really understand one scale. You can move around a lot easier in it. So for this video, to make it easier to understand, everything that we're going to be doing is going to be in the scale of C minor. And the notes in C minor are C, D, D sharp, F, G, G sharp, B flat, C. All right, now that you hopefully have at least a basic understanding of the notes on the keyboard and that a scale is a group of notes that work well together, let's go over the most basic chords that you can use: triad chords. So these chords are just 3-note chords. So there's 3 notes that are all playing in the same scale that sound good together. And there's 2 main different types of triads that you're going to be using: a minor triad and a major triad. And if you remember what I was talking about with the scales, major sounds a little bit more happy and minor sounds a little bit more sad. So let's show you how to make them. All right, the first chord I want to show you is a C minor chord. So we're going to start with a C, C, D sharp, and G. This is a C minor chord. And if we're looking at this in MIDI, the way that I like to think about a minor chord is you have your root note, so that's the bottom note, and then you skip 2 notes, right? So you have a 2-note space, then you put your middle note, and then you skip 3 spaces to put the top note. And then you get those 3 notes together that make that minor chord. Now, all you need to do to make this minor chord into a major chord is simply move this middle note up 1. So now you're changing it to 3-note space in a 2-note space, and then this is a C major chord, which by the way is not in the scale of C minor, but take a listen to how these sound different. So the minor chord sounds like this. Major chord, a little bit different tone. So these two chords are going to be the building block for 90% of the chord progressions that you're going to need to use. All right, so all that stuff is super basic, and I just wanted to get it out of the way so that if you have no understanding, you at least have a little bit more of a foundation, so the rest of this video makes a little bit more sense. But right now, I'm going to show you a little bit of a cheat code that I'm sure a lot of you guys already know, but this really helped me when I was a beginner coming up with chord progressions. Essentially, what you want to do is make sure that you have your scale lock on in your DAW. So for Logic, you're going to go over here on Scale Quantize, choose C and then natural minor. So we're in the C minor scale, and then you're going to choose the paintbrush tool. And what this is going to do is not allow you to place a note out of key. So every single note that you place is going to be in key. It's impossible to put something out of key. And if you're in FL, I know you can use the ghost notes, so you can go up somewhere in the top left, I think, and then choose the scale that you want the notes to show for, and then it'll highlight the notes that are in the scale. So pretty much the trick or cheat code is you just skip every other note in the scale. So let's start with this C note right here, and let's try to make that minor triad that I was talking about earlier. So without having to count the two spaces, I would just try to place a note here. Doesn't let me. If I go up here, it lets me. So I'm going to skip every note in the scale, skip this note, boom, that's the next note it lets me place. Those notes sound pretty good together. Now let's do that again. Try to place one here, doesn't work. Oh, this one does work. So we're gonna skip it and go to the next note. This one doesn't work. It's not in the scale. That one lets me press it. So boom. Look at that. We have a C minor. You have that 2 spaces right there in that 3 space right there. So essentially you can make any chord if you just click around in random places like this, right? If I just skip this note, go here, skip it here, and I do this until I have 3 notes on each chord playing together. Now, that doesn't mean that it's always going to sound good together, you know, like a real professional progression, but all these notes are going to work together. So essentially what you want to do is you want to build a root note progression that you like. Let's say click in right here. Let's say we want to go down here, and then we want to go up. So now I'm just going to do that, skip a note, skip that, boom, right there, skip this one. We're right here, skip this note in the scale. There, we skip this note in the scale and go here, skip this note in the scale, go here, and so on and so forth until you get this progression right here. So you can make chord progressions like this super easily. However, I think if you rely on this technique forever, you will never really understand why stuff works, and it will kind of limit your creativity. So I think this is a great place to start. But if you actually want to advance further, you don't want to always rely on this scale lock to make sure everything is in key. All right, so those are like the fundamentals of how you can just build your own chord progression. But sometimes for genres like R&B and soul, you want to have a little bit more emotion to your chords. These sound a little bit, I mean, the notes work together, but they just sound a little boring and kind of stock. So the next level up, some people kind of get scared whenever they see a number by a chord, like a major 7 chord or a minor 7 chord. And I remember thinking that all that stuff was gibberish and it made no sense, but it's really not that hard. A triad is 3 notes. A 7 chord is 4 notes, which is confusing because it's the number 7, but there's 4 notes. But essentially, all you need to do to make this chord progression into a 7th chord progression is extend each one of these chords by 1 note. We're just going to do that same exact trick with skipping every other note in the scale. So we skip that note right there. Can't place a note there. Boom. Now we have that chord right there, which is a C minor 7. And if you're wondering why that's a C minor 7, before this was just a C minor, right? But then we added the 7th note in the scale, this B flat, which makes it a C minor 7 chord. And the way that I personally like to visualize this whenever I'm working in MIDI is a minor 7 has 2 spaces right here, 3 spaces, just like I explained earlier. And then for the last note on top, 2 spaces. And if I wanted to make this into a C major 7 chord, all I would do is grab this middle note and put it up just like we did earlier to make our C minor into a C major chord. And then we take this note and put it up 1, and then we go 3, 2, 3. And then you get that kind of sound. It's a lot more bright, happy. That's a more dark kind of sad sound. So that's a major 7 and a minor 7 for you. So now we're going to go in here and extend all these chords into 7 chords to give it a more emotional kind of R&B feeling. So 7 chords are a very great tool if you want to make it sound a little bit more soulful. And if you want to go even further, you can extend on top of that by making 9 chords, which sounds confusing again, but really all it is adding another note, extending it. So we're going to skip this note in the scale, go here, skip this note in the scale, go here, and then you get something like this. So that makes it sound even more interesting if you were to compare it, if we delete those 7 and 9 notes compared to this. So if you're going for a more soulful, kind of rich kind of feeling with your chords, you definitely want to use some 7 chords and 9 chords. And like I said, this is a great way to get started, but please do not stay here forever and just be handicapped by the scale quantize. You're definitely going to limit yourself in your creativity. So what I would recommend to kind of break from that, once you kind of understand that and you want to move forward a little bit more with your progression, is study the chord progressions of your favorite songs. And I've actually got this website that you guys can check out. It's called Chordify. And essentially you could just search up any big song that you like and you can find out the chord progression from that song. So let's say you like, I don't know, one of my favorite songs is Pipe Down. So I can click right here and I can see that it's a D major 7 to a C sharp minor 7. So then I could go and I could click in that progression to kind of see how those chords work together. And then you're going to start to realize, damn, like almost all of my favorite songs use the same chord progression. That's where you can find the chord progressions that really fit you and your sound. That being said, it would be a super lame tutorial if I just told you to go out and study other songs. So to get you started, I'm going to give you 10 chord progressions that never miss that I use for R&B, hip hop, trap, all that kind of stuff. And after I show you how to make these chord progressions from scratch, I'm going to show you how to take a MIDI that looks like this and turn it into a MIDI that looks like this without a ton of crazy music theory that's going to take you years to learn. But real quick, before I get into those 10 go-to chord progressions, I want to tell you about the Sonics Academy. A few months back, I started this community for serious producers who want to level up their music and level up their careers as producers. And inside of here, I do 2 weekly live meetings where you can ask me questions, get your music reviewed by me, have me fix your beats. I also have Grammy-nominated platinum producers come on, listen to your beats, potentially collab with you. I do masterclasses on how to play the piano, how to make money as a producer, and there's a huge library of pre-recorded courses and videos that you can watch on how to make chord progressions, how to make vintage samples, how to make trap samples, how to grow your business as a producer and do it full time, how to plan out your weeks, pretty much everything that you could need to advance yourself as a producer, whether you're more focused on just getting better music-wise or you're also focused on the business side of it. So if you've ever wanted some more in-depth knowledge from me, whether it's from my courses or actually getting your questions answered face-to-face on a call, definitely check out the first link in the description to join the Sonics Academy. As you can see by these testimonials right here, people are really liking it, and I think you will too. So check that link in the description. But anyways, back into the video. Now that I got my little shameless plug out of the way, here are my 10 go-to chord progressions that never fail. And some of these are pretty basic, but they get more interesting as the video goes on. But to start out with the easiest chord progressions, let's start out with some progressions that I use for my more hard sounding melodies for trap or hip hop, stuff like that. All right, for our first chord progression, we've got a C minor to C sus2 chord, which is one of the most basic overused progressions, but you need it if you want to make dark trap stuff. This progression is great for making dark 21 Savage, Lil Baby, Future kind of trap stuff. And to give you guys some more context, I'm actually going to play some full melody examples using these chord progressions. So this is the kind of vibe that you can get with the C minor to C sus2 progression.
Didn't sleep last night. Got too many thoughts on my mind. Scared to close my eyes. The demons in my head might bite.
So as you can tell, very dark, hard trap kind of sound. And it is by far the easiest chord progression that you can build. If we go right here, and we start at this C, and then if you remember earlier in this video, I said that a minor chord has 2 spaces to the middle note. So if I count 2 spaces and go here, and then it has 3 spaces from the middle note to the top note, I go right there, just like that. There's our first chord. Now, all that we're going to do to make this chord progression is copy this over, and we're going to take this middle note and suspend it, which is just a fancy word for saying put it down 1 note, and that makes it a C sus2 chord. As you can see right here in my little chordy app, C minor, and then we just move this note right there, down 1, C sus2. Super repetitive, but that's kind of what trap music is built off of. So definitely a great go-to one to get started with. And for all these chord progressions, I also want to give you a go-to BPM. This is not the only BPM range that you can use for these progressions. This is just the range that I find myself using time and time again with these progressions. So for the C minor to C sus2 progression, I use anywhere from like 110 BPM to 170-ish BPM. And I find that that range works pretty much every time. All right, now for our second progression, we have C minor to G minor. And this is a very simple progression progression, just like the first one I showed you. And it gives off that same dark trap kind of vibe, but this progression is actually very versatile. You can get a bunch of different feelings from it. Here's a little example of what it sounds like. So as you can tell, it's still got that dark trap kind of energy, but it's just a tad bit more melodic than that C minor to C sus2 progression. So how do you actually build this? So we're going to start with that same C minor chord, and let's just drag this out like that. Now to make it a G minor, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then we land right here on that G note. So now we have that C minor chord, and we didn't change anything about the chord other than pitch it down 5. So this is a G minor chord. And this one is super versatile as well. I would say that my go-to BPM range for this is anywhere from 100 BPM all the way up to 180 BPM. So you can really go anywhere with this one. All right, for our third progression, we're going to have a little bit more of a melodic trap kind of feeling. So those last two are very good for more dark leaning trap stuff. But if you want to make some more wavy stuff like Gunna, Lil Uzi, those kind of artists that have a little bit more of like a melodic sound to their melodies, the most go-to progression I can think of is a C minor to A flat major to B flat major. So it's a 3-chord progression. I'll show you how to make it in a second, but let's take a listen to how it sounds in context. So the way that I like to do this progression is to have a C minor chord play out pretty long, and then at the end it goes between the A flat major and the B flat major super quick. So if we go right here and we build our C minor chord, as you can tell, we've started all 3 of these progressions with the C minor chord, and we let it play out for 2 bars. And then if we make sure that we have our scale quantize on, I'm just going to go down 2 notes in the scale. So not 2 notes, but 2 notes that are in key. So we have this note, right? Boom. I'm going to go right here. And then we go up 1 right there. So if you look at just the bass line, it starts high and then it goes low and then it walks back up and it resolves. Skip this note, go here, skip this note, go here, skip this note, go there. Like that, you get something like this. One of the best progressions that you can use to get that wavy trap sound right away. And for BPM on this, I would recommend sitting anywhere from like 110 to like 150-ish BPM, a little bit slower than the other ones I find works well. All right, and for our 4th progression, this is going to be the last more basic triad progression. We've got G minor to A flat major. And this is the best chord progression you can use if you want to get that Travis Scott trap kind of feeling. And just to give you a little bit of context of what this progression sounds like when you actually dress it up in a full melody. Unlike the other 3 progressions that I just showed you, this one we're not actually going to start on C minor. We're going to start on G. So we're going to put this right here, and then this next bass note, we're putting it up 1 note. So that is like the bass root notes of the progression. And then on the first one, you're going to build a minor. So 2 spaces, go right here, 3 spaces right there. And then you're going to do a major chord on the second one. So you're going to have 3 spaces from the bottom to the middle and 2 spaces from the middle to the top. And then you have G right here. This is a G note. So you have G minor, and then it goes up to G sharp or A flat. And then you get this major chord. And with this progression, I really find that this rhythm where you don't just play it right on the bar, but you play it just a little bit before the bar comes in, a quarter note before, works really well. You can even arpeggiate it. We'll get a little bit more into the techniques like that later on in the video, but that progression sounds really good at about 130 BPM to 150 BPM. It works every single time for those Travis Scott, Don Toliver kind of vibes. All right, now moving on, we're going to get into a little bit more complex progressions with some more emotional vibes. A lot of times R&B and soul have more complicated progressions with out of key notes or 7th chords, 9th chords, all that kind of stuff, but it's really not that hard. It's really just adding an extra note or 2 to the chord progression. So let's dive right in. All right, so the 5th progression is A flat major 7 to G minor 7. And this is by far my go-to chord progression when I'm making emotional melodies, whether that's R&B, soul samples. This progression never misses. And if you want to make these kind of vibes, I recommend just sticking with this progression because I have used and abused this progression. So let me show you what it sounds like in context.
Losing you. Oh, it's tearing me apart.
believe it or not, for how complex that sounds, that's literally only 2 chords. But you can also do some really good like R&B, Drake, emotional kind of vibes like this.
Tears on my pillow for you, for you.
All right, now let's actually make this chord progression. What you're gonna do is you're going to start on this note right here, which is A flat, and then we're going to make a major 7th chord. If we use that same skip a note in the scale, we skip this note, go here, skip this note here, skip this note here until we see 4 notes. Then we have a 7th chord, copy and paste that over and just put it down 1 note. And then you're gonna take the middle note and the top note and put it down like that. And this progression works in so many cases, and you can really build a bunch of crazy stuff on top of it. And by the way, the go-to BPM that I like to use for that is anywhere from around 75 to 100 BPM. All right, for our 6th chord progression, we have one that's very, very similar to that last one I just showed you. It's literally only got the difference of 1 note, but that 1 note gives it a different, darker kind of tone. So this is what it sounds like in context. So if we're to remake that last progression, we start right here, and then we skip notes up in the scale until we get that 4-note major 7 chord. All we're gonna do is pretty similar to one of the trap progressions I showed you earlier. It's copy and paste this over and then pitch it down 5. And then you have the A flat major 7 going to E flat major 7, or D sharp major 7 and G sharp major 7. So this one you can use pretty much the same exact way, 75 to 100 BPM for some R&B or soulful melodies. Moving on to the next progression, our 7th progression is F minor 7 to G minor 7 to A flat major 7. Or you can reverse the order and go A flat major 7 to G minor 7 to F minor 7. And I really like to use this for some more bouncy R&B and soul kind of melodies. So here's some examples of what this kind of progression sounds like in practice.
Keep on going, even when I get that no shit, that this ain't gonna work it.
So you play the chords a little bit faster in this one, at least the way that I like to use this progression. So for this progression, we're gonna start on F, then we're gonna go skip a note on the scale until we get a minor 7. And then what I like to do is chop it right there so it's only playing for a half bar. And then I'm gonna put this up 1, 2, and then right there we get our G minor 7. So it's the same exact chord, just put up 2. And then right here, we're gonna go to that A flat major 7 chord. A flat, C, D sharp, G. And then if you wanted to reverse the order, something I like to do a lot is I just copy this over and then I kind of have them playing both patterns in one progression. So I'll essentially just take this and I'll just reverse the order of them manually like that. And then you get a progression like this. I've made so many melodies that have gotten placed and sold a bunch of beats with this progression right here. It doesn't miss. And BPM wise for this, I would say stick anywhere from 160 to like 190 BPM. And it'll instantly give you that like Drake interlude R&B kind of feeling. All right, this next chord progression is another great one for these bouncy R&B kind of melodies. And it's almost the same progression. The last chord just changes a little bit and it changes the tonality of it again, which sounds like this in practice. So again, this progression is very good for that more like stop and go, bouncy, playing off each other R&B feeling. And this is the last progression that we just made. So if we just keep this the exact same, but delete this last chord, all we need to do to make this last chord is take this minor 7, because this chord progression is all minor 7 chords. We're just going to pitch this up 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. For this one, I would stay around the same BPM range of 160 to 180 BPM. And you can use these in different BPMs, but I've just find that those ones always give the best vibe, at least in my opinion. All right, for our 9th chord progression, we've got one that I like to use for some more like sad, emotional R&B kind of melodies. And this one is C minor 7, to B flat major, to G minor 7, to A flat major 7, back to G minor 7. And to show you what it sounds like in practice, I've got this old loop pulled up, which has one different chord, but it gives off the same kind of emotion.
Someday we'll meet again. We'll meet again. We'll meet again. Oh.
All right, so let's build this one from scratch. So we start on C, and then we go down one note in the scale to B flat major, and then we go down in the scale one more time again here, and then one more time again here. So although on paper it might look like some crazy complicated progression, it's really just this descending progression with the extra harmony notes added on top to make them chords. Now, one little thing I do once I have this basic progression right here that's just descending, just to add a little bit more of like some cool sauce to it, is I will take this last note and shorten it a bit and leave a half bar right here and put this G right there. And it just makes it a little bit more interesting. So from there, if we have our brush tool and our scale quantize still on, we just do that same skip a note trick. Let's do that same exact trick for the next chord. Then we would get something like this if we wanted to do a B flat 7 chord. The only problem with that is for the vibe that I'm going for, this sounds a little bit too like smooth R&B and soul, and I'm going for a more like sad vibe. And this note that's adding tension is not really fitting the vibe. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna take this note and put it up right here, and you get this. And then from there, I'm just gonna build 7 chords on these using that skip a note in the scale trick, and then you get something like this. Especially if you pitch it down to like some deeper notes, I find it sounds really nice. And if you play it very gently. My go-to BPM for that is anywhere from like 80 BPM to like 95 BPM. Find that range works really well. And then for my last go-to chord progression, we've got one that when you look at it on paper, it looks super confusing. If I play you the chords real quick in this Chordy app, you'll see that the actual chord names look very confusing. It's really not that hard at all. F7 sus2 to the C7 sus2. And this is really good for like that Rick Ross, Maybach music, like luscious, soulful kind of vibe. And in a full finished loop, it sounds a little like this. The way that I personally like to think about this chord progression, instead of, telling you to put a C7 sus2 chord down, it's really just a minor chord. So we have our C minor chord. And then if you remember, one of the first progressions I showed you on the trap side of things is you just take that minor chord and pitch it down 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is essentially the main progression. All we're going to do is change the bass notes and make these play 4 notes at a time. So we're just going to take these bass notes and then we're going to pitch these down 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And that brings us to F going to C instead of C going to G. And for the BPM, honestly, that 150 BPM range is really where I like to use this progression. So there's my 10 go-to chord progressions. I'll actually attach a free download where you can go and grab all of those chord progressions in the description down below. Just in case you don't want to have to go and make them from scratch every time, you can just drag them in and kind of learn how they work together while you're still learning. But for some of you guys, you might be wondering, okay, this video is called The Ultimate Guide to Making Chord Progressions, and all these chord progressions are fairly basic. In my personal opinion, you really just need some fundamental, good basic chords, and then some knowledge on how to elevate those chords to sound like you're playing some crazy stuff. So what I want to do now is take a very simple 2-chord progression and show you how you can flip it on its head to make it sound advanced and like you're playing some crazy stuff on the keys. And you can experiment with any of these chord progressions that I showed you in this video, but for this demo, I'm going to be using the A flat major 7 to G minor 7 progression. And by itself, doesn't really sound like anything special. So the first thing that you can do to instantly level this up is something that I'm not going to get too much into depth with in this video, but is actually play them live. But assuming that you can't play the keys, let me show you how to spice this up just in MIDI. First thing that I would do is I would take the bass notes or the root notes, the bottom note of the chord, copy it, and then put it down an octave and maybe do that twice. So now we got 2 different octaves. So this is very simple. You're literally just playing the bass notes in lower octaves. This is not some secret sauce yet. We're getting there. But instantly it sounds a lot more luscious and full. So right now, as you can tell, we're playing a very spaced out rhythm, which is not always bad, but if you want to spice it up and make it sound a little bit more interesting, you could even just, you know, add some chord hits right there. So it's playing twice. Chop some notes here and there, maybe go down like that. Like, so we're literally not adding any new notes. We're not adding any melodies or anything yet. We're just changing the rhythm of it. I could even take this right here and let's add a little pause right there so we get this little cool effect. You can mess around with a bunch of stuff like that. I don't necessarily like that for this one, but essentially just messing with the rhythm and how you play stuff. Like if I was to just play this live to give you another example. Just playing it a little bit more busy could give it more life and maybe give it the illusion that it's a little bit more complicated than it really is. And the next thing you could do to spice it up is a little bit similar to the rhythm, where you're just kind of messing with the notes of the chords and playing them in different parts to give it more energy and more of a bounce. We're going to use arpeggios, which is essentially just changing the order that the notes play in. So it's not just all playing out like this. It's going to be playing out more like this. If you were in MIDI not playing that live on the keys, you would just do something a little bit more like this. Do the same thing right there. Do the same thing right here. So just like that, it's now sounding like there's like a little bit more going on, even though it's just that 2 chord progression. Now, the next thing that we can do to make this sound even more interesting, we're going to mess with inversions. Inversions are essentially just changing the octaves that the notes are playing in to change the voicings, which just change like the tone of the chords. I'm not changing the actual notes of the chord. I would just be grabbing, say, this note, pitch it up an octave, this note, pitching it up an octave, and let's grab these 2 notes and pitch them up an octave. And now, like, if you were just looking at this MIDI, you might think that it's 4 different chords, right? It's really just that 2 chord progression. So inversions and voicings are honestly super easy. The one tip that I do have for them is you want to make sure that notes are playing kind of close to each other. If you were actually playing this on the keys, this note to this note would be quite a big jump. So I would probably make them closer together like this. Probably have it more like this so that the notes are a little closer together. But just something to think about. All right, and the next thing that you can do to make your chord progression sound a lot more interesting, and honestly, this is probably my favorite one on the list. I abuse this trick all the time, is you're gonna wanna add chord sprinkles. And I don't know if that's actually a term, but that's just the best way that I can kind of think about it. And for this, you're gonna need one of these guys. Don't know what this is. This is a sustain pedal. They're only like 10, 15 bucks. You can get them on Amazon. And if you're trying to learn the keys, this is going to be a lifesaver. If I just play a note out on my piano really quick, right? Just stops. But you got to picture this is on the floor. If it's pressed in like this, and then you press a note, it plays out forever. So if you look at my keyboard, what this allows you to do is you don't actually have to keep your hands playing the chords the whole time, right? Because if I just play with no sustain and then I try to do some top line, all these notes that I was playing stopped playing out, which makes it sound kind of empty and just awkward. But with the sustain pedal, if you hold that down, I could take my hands off and now I can go up. All those notes are still playing out. So what I like to do to get this kind of effect, which by the way, if you don't have a sustain pedal, an actual one to use, you can just modulate it in MIDI right here. There's a sustain thing right here. So you can just draw in where you want it to be sustaining and where you want it to not be sustaining. So we can just sustain out all these notes. So you want to make sure that the sustain goes to 0 whenever the chords change. Otherwise, I'll show you what it'll sound like. All the notes will keep playing and they'll bleed into the other chord and it'll sound weird. You hear that? So now that you've got that sustain modulated in the MIDI, there's 2 ways that you can add these chord sprinkles. What I mean by chord sprinkles is essentially, if I'm playing the main chord down here, a chord sprinkle would be when I play it in a higher octave in like a loose kind of way. like that, and it just gives this like pretty kind of effect to it, you know what I mean? Especially when the notes are playing out like that. So if you're lazy and you don't want to actually play it in on the keys, what you can do is we could take this chord right here and just put it up an octave. Do the same thing here. And then from there, you can mess with the inversions. Let's say it sounds a little too high to me. I could put those two notes down an octave, change the inversions right there. Right? This sounds a lot more interesting. And then to make it sound a little bit more human, we want to really play this nice and loose. You don't want this to be like really on the grid. You see the sustain is carrying out, like this note keeps playing through the whole time, even though it's not playing right there. You can go even crazier with it if I play some in a higher octave on my keys. But you could go down instead of up, so strum it backwards so that it ends on the low note like I did right here. Maybe put this right here. Got something that sounds a lot more interesting. Now, the next thing that you can do is add in embellishment melodies. And this is something that really comes in handy when you actually know how to play the keys, because you don't really need to think much about why you're choosing the notes that you are. You can just kind of... You can just play melodies within the chord. But obviously, for this tutorial, I'm assuming that you guys are not there yet. So let me show you how you can make these embellishment melodies without knowing how to play the keys. The best place that I've found to put these embellishment melodies is right before the chord changes. So just to make this simple, I'm going to get rid of all of these extra chord notes that we've put in. So now what we're going to do, if we want to click in some stuff, I would just copy notes that I see that are playing in the chord. So I'm going to go start here. Let's see how that sounds. Just a simple 3-note melody. That's already a nice little transition. But if I wanted to spice it up a little bit, not just only using notes in this chord, if you have your scale quantize on, or if you've got your ghost notes on in FL, you can just make sure that you're staying in the key. And I could go in and maybe I want to do some faster notes too. Maybe more like that. We do something like that and let's see what this sounds like. And then right there, I kind of like how this goes dun dun dun. So I would invert this to go down so that it's not interfering with that little melody that I want to hit. So it's not like some crazy melody. It's just kind of clicking around and making a nice transition into the next chord. So as long as you've got your scale quantize on, you can kind of click around. I would really, really highly suggest using the notes that are in the chord as your home base to build the main idea of the little walk-up melody on. And then just from there, clicking around to see what sounds good to your ears. All right, and for this next trick, I think it would be easier to show you if we didn't have all of these crazy chord sprinkles and top line melodies going on. So if we start with that same basic chord progression, the G minor 7 and the A flat major 7 right here, what we're going to do is we're going to do an out of key note at the very end of the progression that adds some tension that transitions nicely into the next chord. So normally our progression sounds like this, but we're going to change one note in this last chord hit right here to make it out of key. So we have this basic 2-chord progression. All we're going to do is take this middle note and move it up 1 out of key. If I copy this chord over here whenever it loops, you'll see why this kind of works. So the reason that this works is because this middle note right here is going up, and then look at how this is kind of working with the next chord that hits. It goes 1, 2, 3. They're walking all up in the scale. And resolves very nicely. And I have one more trick for this specific chord progression that works super well to get that out of key, like smooth R&B sexy kind of vibe. What you want to do is you want to make this into a 3-chord progression now. So we're actually going to take this and pitch it down 2. So now we have an F minor 7, which this is all perfectly in key. So that already sounds good, but there's no like out of key cool kind of element. So what I do is to make a transition chord, I will take this chord, and as you can see right now, there's a space between all of these notes. Since it's pitched down 2, but to go out of key, we're gonna pitch it down 1. If you look, all these notes are going. So all these notes right here are giving that off key kind of feeling, but it resolves nicely going to this chord that is in key and works nicely. Boom. Super, super good way to get a soulful R&B kind of feeling to your progression. And then lastly, another thing that makes your chord progression sound way more interesting is building them with multiple instruments. So if we bring back just that more basic 2-chord progression right here, to make it sound more interesting, what we could do is duplicate it onto a different instrument, say an electric piano, like this, and then we can play the instrument in different voicings and in different variations. Let's say we want to take away these high chord sprinkles on the Rhodes, and we want to pitch all these notes up an octave to change the voice. And then maybe I want these notes up an octave. So the Rhodes and the piano are both playing the same exact chords, but with different voicings, and it gives it a different flavor. So I could do some transition melodies with just the Rhodes. And then if we were to thicken this up one more time, we could grab a pad. And then for the pad, we could change the voicings again, and we could get rid of all of these extra notes to make it very simple so that the pad is playing a completely different way. Let's say we want the pad to be more of a low octave. We just play it very straightforward like this. But now when you look at the MIDI combined, it looks like you're playing some wild chords, right? It's just those same chords, those same 2 chords with no new notes. If we wanted to make this even a little bit more advanced, we could duplicate the whole pattern, and then the second time around, we get a little bit more interesting. We go in on here, and let's raise that note out of key on all of the instruments. And then you take a basic progression that sounds like this, and turn it into this. All right, so obviously it's pretty impossible to learn everything there is to know about chords and music theory in one video, but I hope that this helped. And like I said earlier, if you want some more in-depth help from me on music theory, business, anything music related, go check out the Sonics Academy. It'll be the first link in the description down below. I'll catch you on the next one. Peace.